Hi, I'm Emma Green and welcome to this episode of the podcast Engineering in Digital. AI and other technologies are no longer anything new. Not only is AI a buzzword that we see everywhere, but even more of us are ourselves using this technology in our everyday lives, even if we don't realise it. One key example of this is within the sports industry. The use of AI in American football, or the NFL, dates back to the early 1990s when game analysis introduced the use of computer simulations to better investigate strategies and player performance. Other sports, such as golf and football, also use the technology so commentators can find bespoke player statistics and present specific performance data during a live match. Today, I'm joined by Thomas Kendall and Matthew Elt of the VEC as our tech experts for exploring exactly which technologies are used by which sports and their benefits. So, welcome Tom and Matt again, and thank you for joining us today on our podcast. So, which sports do you both like personally and why?
We're definitely both fans of rugby union. I've played since I was about 11, and as I've got older, I've just got more interested in watching than playing. Definitely my interest has branched out into other sports. I quite enjoy watching tennis. Yeah. Why don't you, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, Matt, rugby is up there, number one. Why? I suppose you like what you grew up playing. I'm like, you obviously played from like 11. Um, like my dad also enjoyed watching rugby. I think that's a big part of it. We weren't really a football family, so that. Second would definitely be cricket though, vying for the top position. Yeah, rugby, cricket. They're just they're great sports. They're traditional, and like the culture around them is just nice. It's different. It's family friendly. It's enjoyable.
Yeah, proper English sports.
English sports.
And then, do you like the aspect, like the statistics side of it when you watch sport? Do you enjoy just watching it, or do you enjoy knowing the statistics, performance data, speed, anything like that? Do you think it adds value to watching the sport?
I didn't used to care about any of the stats, and then I realised it impacted on winning quite a lot. So I started to take notice, and now I start talking about them and in the pub and and bringing it up about, oh yeah, did you see kicking percentages are down and this and that. But thinking about it from like a technological point of view, in the context of our jobs, it's really interesting, all of the insights that you can gather, and then from there you can think about how it will impact on the teams that are playing, how it impacts on their winning rates, how it impacts on fans and bringing people in to the sport and just getting people interested.
Yeah, I'm going to counteract that. I'm not keen personally. I mean, that's odd. We work for a digital centre. However, I find that the wonderful thing about sport is how human centric it is. I think once you start bogging that down with statistics, it takes away from the romance of what sport is. So all those like statistics are incredibly important, and we'll go into that throughout the episode, I'm sure. But like the number one reason why we love sport, I think, as sports fans, is story. And if you go, well, they kicked 30% and still didn't win, well, it's the moments that things turn and like the story behind them, and the twists and things that you can't lock down to statistics is kind of what makes sport special. So I think they've got a place, but for me, I'm not super keen. No.
I suppose as well, sometimes with your jobs, you probably do enough with data in the week that come the weekend, you probably want to switch it off and just watch. Almost like a film, isn't it? Like I say, with all the twists and turns, it's like a full narrative. But there is a lot of data connected to each sport, a lot of data. So football alone has 11 players per team on the pitch, in addition to their subs, and NFL teams have over 50 players per team, all of which represent a huge data set. So that includes performance, historic data, games, wins, contributions, and so on. So how do you think technology plays a role in this?
Yeah, I mean, as we've talked about on previous episodes, like data needs collecting. Like as you say, when sports started to become statistics based, perhaps in the later 20th century. A lot of it was human research, writing things down. Like there's a limit to the amount of data that you could access and get hold of, and they were quite general things. So like maybe winning numbers, like general, statistics on individual players' weight, speeds, like quite basic things. But now that technology has accelerated massively, like sensor technology and how we can store and process data, you've got thousands of readings a second coming from smart devices and linking those things up. So like how we collect the data has become just a massive thing. Like I always say, if we go to the rugby example, you may notice now that they all have these little squares on the top of their back, and you're like, well, at first you're thinking what those things are doing, but they're like sensors are collecting acceleration data, like GPS coordinates. Like everything is just in a little box on your back, whereas 30 years ago you would have had to strap a PC on and run around a pitch to get the same kind of thing. So yeah, the systems and software that we use now are just so much more advanced that there's an opportunity to collect that data. I think it's a good starting point.
There's loads of different things you can do with the data. So Tom's mentioned about the wearables, but sport's so much bigger than what an individual person is doing. You've got kind of officiating, which can really use technology, and you've got fans as well, to boost engagement. So I think those are both areas where technology can be used to integrate into sport as well.
So in different sports, who decides what data is valuable, and then how is that data captured and then potentially used?
Yeah, different sports, different data will be useful, and it depends on the stakeholder who wants the data, right? So a performance coach will be after very specific statistics on, I suppose, player fitness, impact levels, that actually a manager of a team or a venue manager, like pitch manager, would want more statistics on match day experience, or how many people are coming through the door, how many of these things are we selling, like even shirt sales linked to like performance. So that would mean nothing to an athletics manager, but everything to the business side. And then you've got maybe like ground staff who would want different bits of data, like weather data, wear data on pitches. Like equipment manufacturers would want different data again. So like who is after the data plays a massive role in what data you would collect. And there would be crossover, but I think there's probably quite distinct lines depending on which stakeholder wanted what.
Yeah, I think the rules of the sport have a big impact as well. So you see things like Hawkeye in tennis, it's quite a specific thing. So that's only in kind of tennis and in cricket kind of applicable technology. So that's aiding in kind of refereeing and decision making. But you see that kind of similar problem with different solutions in rugby union. So looking at video replays of tackles. And in football, you've got VAR and goal cam as well. So it's a lot of technologies there to help sports uphold their specific rules. So that's each specific to the sport. And like you said about the different roles of the different people in the teams as well. So not just within the sports team, but in the management team. So recruiters. So NFL data is a massive, big deal. I think this is one of the big drivers of technology in sport is recruiting statistics for NFL players. So at the beginning, it would have been, measuring things like height, weight, speed, strength. All of these scores will now be, codified, and all the recruiters will have a feel for what kind of player can achieve what in what kind of position and what their stats need to be. So like second rows in rugby need to be 6'8". That's what they're aiming for, I think. But yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
I mean, I think there's been a switch recently. I mean, you're right, that with like the NFL stuff, and I know like American sports does push this kind of technology along quite quickly. And like, don't know, have you seen the movie Moneyball?
No.
Yeah, so like Moneyball, like this was way before advanced computing, right? But just collecting different statistics to other teams means you have an advantage in like for them the transfer market and being very competitive in a season with much lower budget. I can't remember who the team was, but that was like the first really big use of like data and statistics in sports.
Was it the Boston team?
Yeah.
And then they went on to like dominate season after season following that. And
Yeah,
they
they did
said
well,
it was
like-
because of that strategy that was based on the statistics and data.
I think they called it sabermetrics at the time. Probably, I think what it was, but like really gave them an advantage, and that was for like transfers and management. But I think now we've seen the biggest change on where the data comes from because the sports become more player centric. So I mean, maybe it's harsh to say, but over previous years, team and results are probably more important than the people playing the sport. Whereas now, player welfare has become such a big thing that a lot of the advances coming through in data collection and what the data is used for is player welfare. So think of the two sports we talked about, like rugby, cricket. You know, cricket is not an impact game, but they're doing a lot of running quite subtly around the pitch, and you need to know what a player's workload is so you can balance that in game time. Like you look at the Ashes that have just been, and you've got, you know, players rested for certain games, because they need to balance that. The physios know how far a player can run before they need a break to avoid muscle injuries. You know, for rugby, that's different because you need to know like G-force impacts on body, how many tackles, how long they've been on the pitch. And you kind of see it play out in the game of okay, the player's just come back from injury. They've only got like 55 minutes. Like, and you're like, oh, they're taking them off early, but they know, okay, they've only done 2 hours of training in the run up to this. Let's not put them through longer than 55 minutes because then the chances of muscle injury increase. So then we take them off. And that's all player welfare driven. Yeah, which is good to see.
Yeah, there's some interesting technology coming into rugby, especially about player welfare because of these lawsuits to do with concussion. We're beginning to see the impact of brain injuries on retired players. So you get technology now embedded in the ball to look at things. You get these new gum shields, which can measure the force on the head of specific impacts and tackles, which all contribute to this kind of thing. So you can use those statistics to inform when a player is ready to return to the pitch or whether they need more kind of time off. I suppose the head injury assessments that happen as well could access this data. One thing I think I'd like to see going forward with things like selection for teams is because some of these teams are quite big. So like you said, the NFL teams are massive. They've got loads of big player pool. But then, you know, teams like football 11 side, that's comparatively small. And then when you're looking at maybe basketball, it's just 5 people on the court on each team. But each of those players has individual skills and roles to play. And I'd like to see, now that we've got the computing power to do it, a breakdown of how each of those players really contributes to the win rate of their team. I think that could be something we could approach now. Say that you have one player in one position. If you pick them over another player in the same position, what is, you know, if you could mix the statistics from their season, the last 2 seasons, would that be able to change the predictive outcome of the win rate for that team? Obviously, it's much more nuanced than that, and it would be very speculative, but it could be quite an interesting thing to see, especially enabled by AI.
So I've got here some of the ways in which data can be used. So yeah, inform decisions for coaches and backdoor staff, improve current strategies. Could you run simulations to find the best gameplay? Like in basketball, or like say NFL have a lot of different gameplays. They have the book of plays, so you could run multiples to see what would be the best challenge against that particular, like you might have competitor data as well, so you might be able to collate some stuff on them. Like you mentioned very briefly, they're like contingency plans. I know you said about the NFL, like head injuries, but there could be contingency plans in case of injuries, play performance, and then player health. So complete coincidence, we were talking earlier about football players who've had heart problems on the pitch. And now, obviously, they have a lot more checks for heart rates and things like that they have based on experiences in very recent years as well. And they have like breathing and wearable, which are non-intrusive sensors that some players wear, not just in training but in games. So yeah, there's a lot of money in sports and limited ways in which data can be used across different functionalities. So, for example, how could a facilities manager collect and use data?
So a facilities manager would be looking at things like the quality of the pitches. There's quite a lot of different requirements for pitches in terms of sports. I mean, tennis, they've got how many different surfaces do they have? Like three, four?
Three main ones.
Three main
Hard
ones.
court, clay, grass.
Yeah, and they've all got to be upheld to a certain standard. And we talked about previous technology before, which measures all different kinds of atmospheric conditions. And then you've got stadiums which have roofs that can close, like the Principality Stadium in Wales, the rugby stadium, which causes controversy because it feels sweaty in there. And of course, the Welsh fans are really loud. Yes, all of the different ways of measuring these things could feed into that kind of feedback to inform about those kinds of things. Looking into the future, you could see things like smart pitches becoming useful. So rather than having lots of individual sensors based, stuck on players or bits of equipment, maybe smart pitches have kind of integrated systems which can track all of the players all at once around the whole place. I think that would be interesting to see.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite interesting, isn't it, how something as basic as a pitch can become so important in a sport. So I know, I think about football maybe for a bit, and then go, okay, football pitches they just look like a big lawn, don't they? Really, but the amount of like care, but what grass do you use, right? Yeah. And then what length is the grass? So I know at City, Manchester City, they have different grasses on different training pitches to simulate playing over different bits in Europe. So they'll have a pitch which is like playing in Spain and a pitch which is like playing in Germany. And like controlling that has an impact on the performance of the team. And like I don't think as much in rugby, because we know growing up you usually play in a muddy puddle. It's not as important.
on a slope.
On a slope. But I mean, we'll go to cricket just because I'm interested. But like how a pitch plays is incredibly important to the outcome of any game. So Indian teams will tend to do well in India because they are spinning pitches. So they are pitches that spin. They're designed to do that. In England, we have what we call a grass top. So for people like James Anderson, Stuart Broads, they can swing the ball like more, or like you'll get more bounce off a pitch if it's got a certain amount of grass on it, or how hard it is. And this is all developed by a facilities manager or a ground staff. They'll be told, we want this kind of pitch for this team. Can you do it? And then they'll have to work out how to do it and the data that makes that work, and look at weather patterns. And do they know, okay, well, I'm not going to water the pitch today because I need it to be hard, and I know in 2 days' time it's going to rain. So there's a lot of data fed into these decisions, whereas you might just think, well, they just grow a pitch and roll it and off you go. But there's so much nuance goes into them, which is just amazing. I know we at the VEC have worked with some SMEs who have looked at sensors for pitch health, and others for positioning of players. I know is one that I've worked on, and weather predictions, temperatures, as we look more into metaverse applications. You know, building in weather data and predicting weather and predicting temperature. Like, bit of a sidebar, but you know, climate change is having a massive impact on sport, and especially on like pitches and being able to play. Like, it's too wet, seasons get cancelled. It's too dry, like pitches are very firm. So like
Especially
even
big tournaments as well.
yeah. So even being able to predict these things going through times of the year, maybe we'll see different seasons playing out. So you start a season earlier or later, and the facilities manager has to know all this and be able to use all this information to make the best decision to suit their team, because you know it's not just a pitch; it's biased towards your team.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose another factor that facilities managers might be responsible for would be stadiums and fans. How do you get fans into and out of the stadium? How many you expect to come? Transport links, sales of drinks and food. Just facilitating engagement really is something that's more and more important as more and more sports become more visible on the global stage. They're all competing with each other for people's attention and money. So I suppose the easier that you can make that, having more people able to get to your stadium with less difficulty, more facilities available for them, more ways for them to engage. You've got things like the kiss cam and stuff on in American stadiums, which is a great way to engage. And you've got all the social media hashtags and halftime entertainments and things. These can all be leveraged with kind of engagement statistics. And of course, the main spectacle is the sport. So if you can draw more people to the stadium, you draw more people to the sport. If you can draw more people to the sport, you draw more people to the stadium. So yeah, you could almost integrate things like traffic, transport links, knowledge of that whole area, weather knowledge, to integrate that into kind of a bigger ecosystem to facilitate these massive tournaments and events like World Cups. Which I'm sure they do, but it could be done on a smaller scale, I suppose, to help with the more local grassroots areas of sport.
Even if, like, Everton, for example, have moved their stadium, so even before you start building the new stadium, it's the planning around it of, like, like you said, transport links and things like that. And even because it's on the waterfront, how that could impact the grass and the environment. And then we've got a World Cup that's been played in the east, so that's different pitches again. A lot of players are now going to Saudi Arabia, so again, very different heat and climatization of the pitches and things like that people are used to. So as a football fan, I know that Liverpool, for example, have used Neuro 11, which is a German neuroscientist company that focus on the use of electrodes to assess the mindsets and choices being made by individual players, and then working on tailoring their decision making from set pieces. So how do like psychological elements have an impact on data or can influence the data, or is there data from psychological elements that we can use to improve performance?
I think it could be really useful for things like hockey. You get like a short corner and you get these players standing on the goalpost. My wife plays hockey. She was always on the post, and they have to put these masks on because the ball can flick up right in your face and it hits so hard. So I think having some kind of neuro kind of sensors, bit of feedback, bit of electronics, maybe some neuroconvulsive therapy to really get rid of their fear reaction would be extremely beneficial for these teams.
Yeah, I mean, like, sport is so often decided on the finest of margins, isn't it? And split decisions.
Sorry, that was supposed to be a joke about removing fear from hockey players so they could run straight at a ball. You went with it, so I thought, maybe I've invented something.
We're not cutting it out. Leave it in. Yeah, like, so sport is so often decided on the finest of margins, and like you quite often get competitors who must, physically be very similar, and like what makes the best players the best is their decision making in certain situations, and like being able to harness how a top player makes a decision compared to a player who has the potential but doesn't know how to do it. Like how often do we see England lose on penalties, like historically, because they've made the wrong decision, and it's being able to recognize what's going through someone's mind in that time helps train them to do something else. And actually, you think bringing in other technologies that we work on, and like VR, being able to put people in situations and monitor that activity without having to be in specific sporting environment. So, like collecting psychological data in training will probably look very different to somebody's psychological activity in a game, in a pressure moment. So you've got to think, how do you collect the data that's actually useful of when you are in that moment, like, and putting people in the environment and then seeing their reaction right in front of fans with the noise and like the pressure on the line, and making that as realistic as possible. Because I know in training, I could probably score a penalty. Like I think I'd back myself to do that. But like, there we go. Don't hold me to that. But inside Wembley in front of 80,000 fans and the World Cup's on the line, my decision making would probably be very poor. Like I'd probably kick it backwards.
Your legs would be a bit more wobbly.
More wobbly.
But they've even shown, haven't they, on I forgot what the show's called, the Amazon show, where they go behind the scenes of certain football teams each season, and they went, this is from a biased Liverpool fan, they had the like Arsenal team, and then during training they played You'll Never Walk Alone, because they were like, the atmosphere at a stadium is intimidating, so there's no point in training without, like, they basically tried to duplicate that atmosphere, so by the time they went to the stadium and the music singing and everything like that, they weren't intimidated because they were used to it, because they'd heard it all week.
But they still lost.
They still lost because
it was a good idea on paper.
yeah, so but it's like I say, it's a tactic, isn't it? It's trying to get people used to the environment. Nothing to do with data or AI or anything. But
Psychology's become really important, hasn't it? But I don't think we're there yet with the technology to monitor people's brains in that way. We can't really collect data on it. The closest thing is the kind of functional MRI imaging that you can do, but then you've got to have massive magnets and equipment to measure these tiny brain signals, and then you've got to do a load of processing to figure out what areas of the brain are being activated. So I think we're still a ways off kind of that kind of technical insight into that. But maybe there's some ways we can apply technology in a more of a subtle way to, like you were saying, with speakers instead of electrodes.
It's not perhaps making it the priority that you're gonna, like, I suppose if we start getting access to this data, maybe there is a lot of weight on it, but maybe there's not. Like you talked about set pieces in the question. It's like, well, I can know what to do in this situation, but if the guy doesn't beat the first man, like with his corner kick, like what was the point of it all? So like it'd be interesting to see moving forward, like how much impact it would have, because sport is still a physical skills based game.
and also, like, they do a lot of, say, set piece data collection on competitors as well. So when they say, oh, it's going to go down to penalties, this player has had a 75% success rate going to the left, but they will know full well that the competitors will know that, so they might then purposely go to the right. So in some ways it doesn't actually give you any advantage. It's still 50-50. What is the player going to do on the day?
Yeah, you have to teach them advanced rock, paper, scissors.
So speaking of like high pressure situations and quick decision making, F1 cars have hundreds of sensors attached to them, and then this information is constantly through a live feed being collated and analysed across each teams, and the drivers in this very specialised engineers. So how do other sports use data for remaining competitive?
I mean, F1's a great example, because like data is everything, and the investment that goes into like using that data and other technologies, simulation and like CAD design and simulators and all the stuff that goes into it. But like that split second data, knowing what's happening to your car going through a corner, and so many variables in that, from like track temperature up to like wind speed and wind temperature, and let alone is it raining, and what's my fuel load. So knowing exactly at what point in the race, okay, I know if my car's lost half its fuel that I can change the wing angle like by this much, and that would improve downforce through this area, and but in a different corner it's not this, and it's like split second changes, like constant changes in an F1 car and different modes provide a competitive advantage that is outside even of the driver's control. Like the team is incredibly important into that. I think actually F1 is maybe an example of one where like data is so powerful, especially live data. I'm not sure any other non-motorsport probably comes close. But there is like a use of data. Let's think maybe like tennis. You kind of see these small conversations between coach and player on the court of like maybe try this instead. Is that impacted from like data that they've like maybe just by looking they're collecting data, right? But do they have some kind of data on their phone coming in of like maybe try this? We know, okay, this player is not good to their backhand when you do this, to do something else, and actually feeding that information down to a player. Why we see it now more in rugby. You've got like statistics coming from the box delivered by water carriers.
Or Razzie Erasmus disguised as a water carrier.
Yeah, a bit controversial, but it's like trying to feed that information into the sport is as much of a challenge as perhaps.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the work
information
gets done in the training, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So they have all this information before, and they know who they're going to play. So there's not as much of a need for it to be live. But you're right; they're still collecting all this data and they're still using it.
And I mean, like knowing, like especially on one-on-one. So in a team sport, like one-on-ones are so important. And there's an advert like we've been the World Cup warm-up rugby games have been on, and there's this, I think it's Sage did advert, and Brian Havana.
Oh yeah.
Well, I knew in this game that this guy had half a second slower on the turn than something else, and I knew that and used it to my advantage. But he still had to do it. He still had to have the skill to do it. But like even in that advert, at the end of like an advert break during the rugby, Brian Havana's going, statistics are really important to me playing rugby. But like, you said it, man. Like this is all available to players like before the game, and then it comes down to why sport is so wonderful because it's not played by robots. It like relies on people to like put that into action and make a decision based on the data they've got, but like in the heat of the moment.
Yeah.
Data can only get you so far. Like instinct is so much.
Yeah, I think what you said right at the beginning was really on point about it not really being about data. It's sport is about the drama first and foremost. But you create the drama by, I guess, preparing as much as you can. So things like golf, where they can use quite a lot of data to, because it's not like it's competitive, but it's not what your opposition doesn't directly impact what you do. So you can spend a lot of time perfecting your golf swing and your position and getting all of this feedback. I think that's another way. I was going to say similar to F1, but it's not really. It's not got as much data as that, but there's still a load of data that you can get for golf swings and bits of kit that will attach onto your club and
yeah, or like using AI. I know, especially in golf, for like pose estimation. So recognizing the position of golfers, and it's the same, I think, in cricket for bowling actions. But actually, again, not to put a downer on the data, but golf is a very interesting one that everybody's golf swing is different. So although they are probably tweaked to themselves, it's a natural thing that can be improved with data, but you can't go, okay, this guy, Tiger Woods is the best golf player ever, so you should copy his swing, action for action, and you could have the data on that, and like you know how to do it, but you would make a player worse by trying to make him copy it because it's not natural. No, it's the same in cricket. Like rhythm and flow is so much to a fast bowler's bowling action. So someone like Mark Woods or like Stephen Finn, they naturally bowl fast, and like players can try and encourage it, but if they try to change their action too much because, well, this will make you faster, it can make them far worse.
So you'd have to try and distill the biomechanical movement of the best bowlers down to a concept almost that you want to maintain flow, and you don't want to try and accelerate too fast at this point, but you want to accelerate fast at this point. So like maybe when you talk about 100-meter sprinting, you talk about you drive off the line, you stay low up until about this point, and then you start to extend your stride length. But obviously that's different for everyone. Like if I tried to run like Usain Bolt, well, I just would never get near it because my stride length just can't match his.
Yeah, it's the same in team sports as well. Like you see a lot of teams try to copy what the last successful team was, but actually that works for them with a specific set of players. And how often do you see the team win the next sporting competition with a different style to the one who won it before, because you're playing against that? So as every team tries to go, oh well, that worked for them, let's try and copy it, what's the data on that? Then the team that wouldn't go, well, let's change it and like try and improve it. And it's more than one way to like try and win a game, like data fed into it. But you can have an incredibly defensive team, an incredibly attacking team, both fed by data, being very competitive, although they're like completely different. So there's no like, you have to think there's no like set value which is like, this is how you are best at sport, like here's the data to make it's not.
It's kind of similar, like again in football, where they will have the star football player sell to another team, and then all of a sudden they don't seem to play as well in the other team because it's not with the same team, balls are not played to them in the same way. They haven't like learnt how each other work on the pitch and stuff. So that's an argument against the data, actually, that that's not data driven. That's all about just how you as a person work and fit into a team.
It's like a style, like a team style and a player style and a mentality, isn't it? That needs to gel with the rest of them. I suppose whenever you look at data of who wins, you're always looking at outdated data because it's always last year. So I don't know what the stats would be on how many teams retain their titles, but I'd imagine that it's more common that a new team will win and they'll be doing something different.
Which is like kind of why F1 can be quite interesting, because it's kind of the argument as if, is it the team in the car, like the engineers in the car, or is it the driver? And you kind of have there the two sides, don't you? It's almost like data versus non-data, because the engineers are going by all the data, the real-time data that they're getting through the drive. And like, they know speed, they know tyre pressure, they know everything. Whereas the driver, you hear on the radio, is asking them, I feel something's wrong. Is it wrong? And sometimes they'll say, no, it's not a problem. Sometimes they'll say, well, just keep your eye on it. And then sometimes it's the driver that has to make the quick second decision, like millisecond decision. And sometimes that is what can win them races and not.
The best car wins in F1 ultimately, but you have two drivers in each car that is practically identical, and one wins and one might be seconds behind. It's the same thing. So the data is all the same, right? I don't want to name names, Emma. I think it'd be harsh, but there is a difference to the competitiveness of drivers, which is it's a trained thing, but it's a natural thing. So the data to get the best car you can have is incredibly important. You can that's as far as your control can go as an engineer or a team. The rest of it's up to the talent of the person who's in the car. So
because currently the Red Bull car is just, you can't get near it. Like Ferrari can't get near it, like no one can. But then it's been quite interesting so far this season is where Max Verstappen is just dominating and has been, like last season, is not slowing down anytime soon. And yet Checo hasn't had as the same success, and yet is in an identical car. And actually his pit stop crew are quicker than Max Verstappen, so there's no other external influence other than the driver themselves.
It's quite a good example because you've got the two parts of it segregated. You've got the information on the side of the car, and you've got the intuition on the side of the driver. It's nicely differentiated between information and intuition.
So then at the heart of all sports is commercialisation and profits, not just sports, any business, really. So how can marketing and sales departments use AI and technology in sports, but then obviously beyond just using sport as the example?
So the broadcaster of a lot of these sports has led the way historically in some of these things. So like rugby, they used to have to go and ask the broadcaster to look back at the footage that they'd recorded to see if a try had been scored. which is quite interesting, in that, the commercialization of the sport was actually making it more accurate. And now we've got these accessible AI models which look at computer vision. We can really start to apply some smart technology to what the broadcaster is seeing. So if we started to integrate this into sports, big team sports, and we talked earlier about wearables, if we had, rather than doing that, if we had, and these GPS trackers that track players around the pitch, if we had just a lot of cameras on the pitch and a bit of facial recognition software, you could tell exactly where everyone was. And we're not using then these wearable sensors, which require, battery and radio telecommunications to get the data to a certain place, and then you go download it and analyze it. If you can do this kind of real-time identification of players around the pitch, if you can do pose estimation, like you were saying, then the broadcaster and maybe the half-time team can really get into the analysis, which they do. But even more so, I suppose. Another way that fans integrate with this stuff is to do things like fantasy football and the fantasy Six Nations rugby, which I always try and do. Throwing shade, right? But yeah, that's massively informed by statistics, and it really gets fans engaged. Like, I could not care less about the kicking percentages of some players before I started doing the fantasy rugby Six Nations, but now, whoa, keep me away.
I mean, that's it, because I suppose the point system is based on kicking distance, running distance, certain things that you want to get feedback from previous games, how good is the player at doing it. But it doesn't necessarily represent. So that might be the best player for the fantasy, but it's not the best player to watch on the pitch. Because he ran forward 100 metres, but then he dropped it. That wasn't very good for the consumer to watch the ball, but still got the 100 metres running statistics, isn't he? Which is quite good.
Yeah,
so it really
absolutely.
depends on which one you want.
Yeah, you end up doing this weird balance between players who are really consistent at what they do, but don't necessarily do anything amazing, and players which every now and then they just break the game apart, but most of the time they're just padding around, getting marked.
But that's like you doing, I don't know how in depth you go, like a basic version of what sports teams are doing, right?
Yeah.
As we were talking about management teams before, like playing fantasy is trying to do the same thing
predictive modeling
with more limited data, but it is a science to it. I mean, like commercial, I suppose for commercialization, and ultimately it's all how do you feed the user experience, and I love how technology has become so ingrained in the user experience over however long. So, like you mentioned Hawkeye earlier, Matt. So how big of a thing is that now in tech? Not just to help a line call, but it's part of the experience of being there. Like you go, oh, they've done it, like, oh, they challenged it. Then you're right, there's a slow clap, there's a slow, and goes on. Like, people love it and watch the screen, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same like slow mo. Like, is it a try in rugby? Was his foot out of the line? Cricket. So it's still the same company. It's still Hawkeye. They're doing it of like delivery review decisions. So was it out? Was it LBW? It's like become part of the crowds looking up at the screen and like trying to imagine sport without it now. It's become so integrated as something that was probably just a tool has accidentally become
a feature,
fan favorite user experience. And like we all hate VAR at the moment, don't we? But it'll probably once it smooths out, it'll become the same thing, right? We'll be like, oh, was it? Let's all look at the screen and wait for it to happen.
It works well. It works well in NFL for those decisions. It works really well. It just doesn't seem to have really transferred into football, and I don't know why. Whether it's the different types of fans or it takes away that conversation sometimes, doesn't it? Of like the debate of whether it was or not. And now there isn't a debate because you're just told if it is.
I find that really fascinating, that the difference in attitude of football to technology versus almost all other sports. So rugby is constantly trying to evolve its rules and add in new technology and things like that. And football is the complete opposite. It's no, we are going to make this accessible to everyone. The World Cup final will be refereed and played in the same way that you do down the park. but the goalposts will be not jumpers. But I find it quite baffling, really, because there's so many great features of refereeing. So, like you were saying, the crowd gets really involved in when there's a dodgy tackle on the screen where someone's hit someone high. Half of it is general, oh, that was really bad, but half of it is everyone going, oh yeah, let's make make this into a drama, and everyone kind of gets involved, and it's really fun. And I'm always surprised that football hasn't got there with VAR. And I suppose it's where you stop, isn't it? Because I mean, if you started looking at contact in the tackle in football, then that would fundamentally change the game from a sport which is all about falling over dramatically whenever you're touched into a sport which would be much more about staying on your feet. And I think that would look very different. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I will restrain myself from commenting, but I'm sure everyone has an opinion on that.
You make an excellent point of we'll see how far technology is allowed to integrate into it, because I know Gilbert, who do the balls, rugby, have now done a smart ball, which you'll be able to know if it was a forward pass, whether players were offside before the pass, like all the things that are within the rules, but actually you're stopping all the time. Like if you replace the referee and the referee's nuance of going, I'm just going to let that bit slide, I'm going to call back on that bit. Like we'll pick and choose what we use, because ultimately technology could replace referees. Like AI could replace referees. Like you wouldn't need a linesman if you knew the player positions all the time and the position of the ball and when it was kicked. What's the point of the linesman? Like you don't need a lot of these things, but I think because, as I said at the beginning, sport is so human-centric, almost will hold back technology, and I hope will hold back technology to allow the human interaction into it, to like aid people to make better decisions, like VAR or decision review systems of going, well, did they make the right decision? Let's help them out, but not replace them, because the decision still comes from a person, and it's nice, isn't it? Like we could lose what is magical about sport by just making it all tech based, and the same with commercialization. Like you can go, well, people love technology, let's just like pour it out into everything. It's like, well, actually, people get a bit bored of it. People want hark back to things the way things used to be. Sport. My dad will go, well, boxing's an interesting one. Who's the greatest of all time? Well, everyone from a different generation will say the heavyweight champion from their generation, right? And everyone harks back to how things were previously. Oh, football was better when they did this, and like rugby was better before all the technology came in. But as things get safer and actually you can have more interaction with it, like where's the balance going to come from? And from a commercialization point of view, that's going to be an important decision of like how much do you leave the core values of the sport alone, because that's almost as important as bringing in technology.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and something that we've not mentioned yet is the role of referees in the game as people. So actually, when you think back about the different sports that you'll watch, referees have some celebrity. So you'll have great respected figures like Nigel Owens, the Welsh referee, who would look up at gigantic colossi who's towering above him and wag a finger at them and say, oh, Christopher, you stop that, and put them in their place, and they'd meekly hold their cap in hand and say, oh, sorry, sir, and then stick their heads between each other's butt cheeks and get back in the scrum where they belong. And that's part of the game, and that's everyone has a chat in the pub about it and says, oh, well, I didn't think it was a high tackle. I thought it was definitely a penalty try. And then someone say, yeah, but Nige said this, and he knows best. And I was like, yeah, Nige knows best.
You'd almost lose the talking points by making things too official.
Yeah.
Well, it was offside. The technology said it was offside. There's no argument to it. But keeping that human in, was it or was it not?
Yeah, just have to sit in the pub in silence.
That's how you're hooked into sport. Stay hooked in.
They're the conversations you hear in the pub after the final whistle. So last kind of question, talking point is, a huge amount of fans attend these physical events in stadiums. So 90,000 sports and entertainment fans can go to Wembley in London, and 132,000 cricket fans can fit into the Narendra Modi Stadium in India. So security is obviously the utmost concern for organisers. So how can AI and data support and ensuring fans can enjoy the sport safely?
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, it's something that can be fed from other industries, I think. I know when you're designing buildings now, like fire simulations and like route simulations have become quite a big thing, and that will probably be also included in like stadium design and like match day design. So predicting numbers of people, where they're going, but we can start to use those machine learning and AI to very quickly understand different situations on a quite a mass scale with high profile computing. So, okay, we know a midweek game against this person brings in this demographic of people and this many of them, and that's very different to the final that's going to be there on Saturday, where it's going to be a full stadium and a very different type of people, coming in. The weather's different.
Yeah.
Like, how do we feed this into a prediction and a simulation of how things are going to go? And actually, that feeds it, ultimately feeds into the safety of the fan. Not to try and go down on football again, but me and Matt like to. So, there's some awful behaviour from fans, right, in football stadium. A lot of it's missed by stewards or security. Like, if you could use AI to recognise people doing violent incidents, like faces of people who you knew were banned from a stadium, they've come on a fake ticket or like somebody else's ticket, but you recognise it's the banned person, right? And this, start to get muddled up with personal freedoms and stuff like that. But the technology could be used for that to apply safety.
I mean, you could make it independent. You could make it look for dangerous situations and just recognise those things and then respond fast to it, just using kind of computer vision to do that, couldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's so important, and just being able to know and predict, like we've seen through history, quite tragic stadium disasters in a lot of sport, and anything where we can use technology or AI to avoid that and ultimately make people feel safe going in can only be a good thing. But simulation, scenario planning, it's all using machine vision or machine learning will become a part of that.
Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today, but a huge thanks to Tom and Matt for joining me today.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Go well.
A huge thanks again to all of our listeners, and as always, if you want to get in touch with anybody at the Virtual Engineering Centre, please contact us at vec@liverpool.ac.uk, or you can find us at www.virtualengineeringcentre.com. Many thanks again, and remember to tune in next time to Engineering in Digital.